Hare Krishna. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you very much to speak about. Today we will speak about Kasishvar Pandit and Bhugarbha Goswami, two very, very exalted devotees in our line, acharyas in our line. I'd like to say thank you first to the GBC SPT group for arranging these really wonderful Kartik classes. It's just great. Every day is more nectar. So thank you very much. And my obeisances, vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhuvyeva patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namne Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paskacha Desatarane Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Giradhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So I'll begin with Kasishvar Pandit first. Unfortunately, there's not a lot known about him, especially from his youth. We do know that he was born in a village called Chhatara, near Calcutta, very close to Calcutta, in the district of Hooghly, and that his father, Vasudev Bhattacharya, was from a very exalted Brahmin Vatsya Gotra lineage. Now, apparently that's a very exalted lineage. From what I can understand, the Gotras are, the different lineages that come down from various sages that are connected to different branches of the Vedas. So it's very interesting and wonderful to be part of one of these lineages that have been coming down from time immemorial. So in short, we know that Kasishvara came from a very elevated Vaishnava family. And Prabhupada mentions in a purport in Chaitanya Charitamrita that Kasishvar Pandit established in this town, this Chhatara village, he established deities of Gauranga and Sri Radha Govinda, and that later Kashishvar's nephew, Rudra Pandit, became the priest. And their descendants have continued to take care of those deities of Kasishvar Pandit in that village up until this day. And Srila Prabhupada also said that sometimes, as a householder, he used to go there for prasadam at midday. And he said the deities are very beautiful. And he also mentioned that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur visited this temple. It was a place where it was known that there were a lot of big festivals. But Prabhupada also mentions that unfortunately, much of the land that belonged to the deities has been sold, and so that has hampered the worship of the deities and the festivals that they have had through the ages. And it's an interesting point because this is a system from long ago that when a deity was established, they would also own the land. They would have land where the service would be taken care of, where you would grow the vegetables and things, where the boga would come from, where the flowers would come from, so that when you establish a deity, you know that you have everything that's required for their seva. And practically all of Vrindavan was owned by the different Vrindavan deities. Like where I'm staying right now, if you come down the lane, you see a little sign and it says Radha Raman Bagicha. And Bagicha means a garden. So, this is certainly not a garden. It's a big apartment building that I live in here, and it's surrounded by buildings. But this was, previously, would have been one of Radharaman's gardens, you know. So, you know, this happens, this goes on. So much of the land of the deities in Vrindavan, of course, has been sold. And so that does hamper the deity worship. And that's something that Srila Prabhupada thought about. That's why he actually established the Mayapur Vrindavan Trust, the MVT. That was a trust that was built so that the deities would be taken care of in case there's any shortage or difficulty. So these are important things to think about. It's our responsibility over, you know, the next generations and generations to come. How will these deities of Srila Prabhupada be cared for? And it would be wonderful if each of them could have, you know, some land. That's probably a little more difficult in the West, but in Mayapur, of course, they have that. They have the gardens, they have the vegetable gardens and things for the service of the deities. So, you know, just an important point. So, apart from that, we don't know so much more about his actual growing up. Most everyone will know or be familiar with Kasishvar Pandit as the personal servant of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in his Jagannath Puri Leela. But not so many people know that actually he was there in Navadvip also. How he came there or why he came there, perhaps for education, it's hard to say, but it is known that he was there and took part in the kirtans at Srivasangam, and he would go with Mahaprabhu to bathe in the Ganges. And it's in Chaitanya Bhagavat, it's mentioned that he was there, Kashishwar was there, with Mahaprabhu when he went to Sridhar's house and drank from his iron pot. And Vrindavan Das Thakur mentions there that Kasishvar Pandit was so dear to Mahaprabhu that he refers to him as being in the heart of Lord Chaitanya. Kashishvara Prandan. So, very, very dear. So as he was Mahaprabhu's godbrother, being a disciple of Ishwar Puri, as well as Govinda. And he received tremendous mercy from Ishwar Puri. He was his personal servant and with him day and night. I don't know exactly how long, but it appears that it was a very long period of time, right up until his departure from this world. And just before he departed the world, he instructed both Kashishwara and Govinda that when I'm gone, you go and you serve Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And so they took that to heart, of course, the last instruction of their spiritual master. And when he, first Govinda arrived in Jagannath Puri. Kashishwara did a little pilgrimage before he came. But when both of them arrived, they were received with great respect and care and attention by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he provided them with a place to stay and everything that they needed and honored them. So just see how Mahaprabhu was setting the example for all Vaishnavas, how to receive guests, seniors, or anyone for that matter, you know, with great care and attention and respect, and to provide them and to be careful to provide them their needs. So good lesson there for all of us. But when Govinda and Kashishvara arrived and they offered their service to Mahaprabhu, Mahaprabhu was in a quandary. He was like, he went to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya because he didn't know what to do. The Lord didn't know what to do, so he's asking his devotee. And he said to Sarvabhauma that, you know, the servant of my spiritual master is my superior. How can I accept service from them? But it would be an offense if I don't follow the order of my spiritual master. So what shall I do? So then Sarvabhauma said very clearly, the order of the guru takes precedence over the rules of etiquette. So it was very clear that he should go ahead and do that. There's so many examples in which this principle is shown that, let's see, the example of Govinda himself when he was serving Mahaprabhu. After one kirtan, Mahaprabhu was so tired after kirtan, he laid down right in front of the door. And so Kasishvar was meant to come and massage his feet, but he didn't. Normally you wouldn't step over the body of the spiritual master. It's not really proper etiquette. And but he thought, but I have to serve. I have to do my service. So he did step over, and then he continued to sit there. So then when Mahaprabhu awoke, he was, oh, why are you still here? Why didn't you go take prasad? And he said, well, I didn't want to step over your body. And so, well, you must have stepped over it when you came in. And he said, yes, but that was for service. So, but I couldn't step over it just for me to go take prasadam. So Mahaprabhu appreciated that. He understood, that it requires a little, it's not enough to just know the rules in devotional service. It requires discernment. And as Prabhupada used to say, it requires a little intelligence, to understand what is actually going to be pleasing to the spiritual master. It's not an automatic thing. It's not like, okay, there's these rules, we just follow this. It's personal. Everything is personal. Like, say for example, I'm not sure if this is a good example, but in the early days, there was a GBC in New York who married someone who they thought was actually the heiress to the Toyota fortune. I mean, she wasn't. She pulled the wool over everybody's eyes. But for some time, that's what people thought she was. And so she was married to the GBC there. And they were doing some very strange things, like offering things to the deities that really shouldn't. I mean, it was weird. It was very weird things. But, the devotees were like, well, I don't know, he's a GBC. And but then Prabhupada found out, and he said, why did no one say anything? This is not correct. This should not be done. Use your intelligence, We're like, well, he's the authority. So the point being is that we are not blind followers. We have systems that are meant to facilitate and help us in our service. We have etiquette, we have rules, but ultimately, it's very personal. How to serve the spiritual master in an appropriate way in any given time and circumstance, it may be very, very different, Then this principle was elaborated on more fully, because when Govinda came, this is, another right after that follows, that was a real example of this principle of what should and should not be done. So when Govinda arrived, Sarvabhauma went to Mahaprabhu and he said, why did Ishwara Puri keep a servant who was from a Sudra family? And so in the purport, Srila Prabhupada really gets into it. And he said Govinda actually came from what would be considered a Sudra family, but because he was initiated by Ishwara Puri, he was certainly a Brahmin. And so this question, well, why did this question come up to Sarvabhauma? Because according to Smriti Shastra, which gives, rules for directions for varnashram, it says that a Brahmin can't accept a disciple from lower castes, or otherwise he'll be contaminated. But Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu replied that his spiritual master, Ishvara Puri, was so empowered that he was as good as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As such, Ishvara Puri was the spiritual master of the whole world. He was not a servant of any mundane rule or regulation. An empowered spiritual master like, this is Srila Prabhupada's purport. I'm reading, I have that here. An empowered spiritual master like Ishvara Puri can bestow his mercy upon anyone, irrespective of caste or creed. The conclusion is that a spiritual master who is authorized and empowered by Krishna and his own guru should be considered as good as the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself. That is the verdict of Vishwanath Chakravarti, Saksad Hari. An authorized spiritual master is as good as Hari. As Hari is free to act as he likes, the empowered spiritual master is also free. As Hari is not subject to mundane rules and regulations, the spiritual master empowered by him is also not subject. According to Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishna Shakti Vinahi Tara Pravartana. An authorized spiritual master empowered by Krishna can spread the glories of the holy name of the Lord, for he has power of attorney from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the mundane world, anyone possessing his master's power of attorney can act on behalf of his master. Similarly, a spiritual master empowered by Krishna through his own bona fide spiritual master should be considered as good as the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself. That is the meaning of Shakshadhari Tvena. So, yes, Prabhupada gives very clear, how the spiritual master's pleasure and how serving the spiritual master, can and often supersedes whatever these, so many varieties of rules and regulations that are there in the Shastra. So anyway, Kasishvar Pandit and Govinda, they did become the personal servants of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So imagine this service that they had to be with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu 24/7, to be the personal servants. It's very amazing. So when apparently Kasishvar was quite well built and very, very strong. So when Mahaprabhu would go to see Lord Jagannath, of course, crowds of people would come around and they would want to get near him, want to touch his feet. So, but he would hold the crowds back. That was his service. He would keep everybody back so that nobody could touch him. And he was just very physically strong. And Govinda would walk beside Mahaprabhu and he would carry his water pot. And then, especially during Rath Yatra, when Lord Chaitanya was dancing in front of Jagannath's cart, they would form 3 rings around the Lord, and to hold people back. So the inner ring would be Lord Nityananda and others, and then the second ring was Kasishvara and Mukunda and some others, and then the third ring was Prataparudra and his subjects. So you could see there was really a real need. They need 3 rings in order to keep everybody back, because, this is the thing in India. This is a wonderful thing that, people understand the value of getting the mercy. At least, many people do, and especially in history it's that way. Maybe it's being lost now. But they really want mercy. I mean, they may want it for a variety of mundane reasons, but they know that you get it from the devotee or from the Lord. They know where it comes from. So, this is a superior intelligence. Actually, not sure if I guess it's an okay thing to an example. When Tamal Krishna Maharaj departed this world in such an unexpected and sudden way, and they were transporting his body back to Mayapur, the villagers around the area, they heard that this great soul has departed, and thousands of people rushed out as they're driving along. They would not let the vehicle go by. They said, "We want final darshan. We want to touch his feet." I don't think they allowed them to touch his feet, but there was no question of proceeding further. They had to open the doors and allow people. They just wanted to bow to a saint. Is that amazing? It was wonderful, actually. It was glorious. And yeah, so Mahaprabhu really required protection. And so that was Kasishwara. He was there all the time, taking care. And also he was the Mahaprashadam server. He was one of the 7, I guess there were 7 head people that organized the prashadam. So he was at the head of that. Like you see, sometimes we go on parikrama, and or anywhere at temples, there's some devotees that they're just the prashadam servers, that they just want to rush and serve prashadam. Like most of us, I want to rush and take prashadam, but these more advanced devotees, they want to rush and serve prashadam. So that was Kasishwara. He would serve the prashadam after the kirtan, after the Rath Yatra procession. And so you imagine just the incredible mercy to have been the personal servant of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Who would not love this? But at the same time, one should understand what an exalted and difficult service this is. It's not so easy to be close, even to be the servant of the spiritual master, what to speak of Mahaprabhu. My husband, who was Srila Prabhupada's servant for quite a long time, he said that the first day, Prabhupada said, "Now your job is to just sit here and be on call 24/7, whatever. You just sit there." So this sounds really nice, but just imagine how much time we spent. I mean, at least I can speak for myself. I want to go now and do this. I want to go, have prasadam. I want to go lay down, or whatever it is I want to do. Most of us are driven, or I think some of us are driven by our own wants. So to just simply be in the service mood at every moment and to not be worrying about my own self, that's not an easy thing. That's not an easy thing. But for such exalted devotees, of course. And that's why, advanced devotees, it has to be very advanced devotees to do this. Otherwise they become familiar, or they just can't stay focused. If you're not really in servant mood, it's hard to stay focused. You have to love the master in order to do that. So really it's about love. I mean, it's what everything boils down to. To be a good servant, you really have to love the person, to serve them well, to watch, to see every moment. What do they need? This is, a servant is actually, is the highest position, to be a servant. It's not a small thing, So anyway, so this is what Kasishvar was doing in Jagannath Puri. And wonderful service, direct to Mahaprabhu, with him day and night. But meanwhile, in Vrindavan, there were really big developments happening, so much going on. Rup, Sanatan, all the 6 Goswamis, the deities are being found, they're doing the writing, they're finding holy places. And so when Rupa Goswami found Govindaji, then he began to serve him with all his heart and made so many wonderful arrangements. And I'm trying to think about, there was I listened to a class by Andrujimna recently, Andrujimna Maharaj, where he describes all what happened after Govindaji appeared in Vrindavan. It's so interesting. You should listen to those classes. He gave a series of classes about Govindaji and when Govindaji arrived. So Rupa Goswami was just immersed in the service of Govindaji, and after they found him at the Yoga Pit, and they had this elaborate celebrations, and then Rupa Goswami began organizing everything, all these amazing food offerings afterwards, and he started to have like many major festivals. I think he said something like 38 festivals a year, for every season. They would have these different festivals, some special things on Ekadashi, and he got so involved in the service of Radha Govinda that eventually he wrote to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he said, in the service of Sri Govinda Dev, my days and nights are passing like blinking of my eyes. But I am not giving proper attention and time to writing of the scriptures as you ordered. So if you can kindly send someone from Puri who can help me serve my Govindaji, then I can continue with my other sevas. So of course Mahaprabhu was so happy to receive this news that Govindaji is there and he's being served. And so naturally he wanted to send his best man to help. This is a big service, so who is the best person? So Kasishvar Pandit at that time was a pujari at a Nrsingadev temple inside the courtyard of the Jagannath temple. And, or he had been prior to that, I'm not sure if it was right at that time, but apparently he had the experience of being pujari and worshiping in the Jagannath temple. And Mahaprabhu had seen how he serves. And so he was very, very pleased with him. And apparently he sometimes worshipped even the Shila of Mahaprabhu, the one that he gave to Raghunath Das. And, in other words, he was an expert pujari. And Mahaprabhu knew that. So he requested him, please go to Vrindavan. So you can imagine if you were there participating in all the pastimes with Mahaprabhu and he's saying, now I want you to go. So he was just, his heart broken too. He said, how can I honor your request without giving up my life? He just couldn't imagine. So Lord Chaitanya understood his heart. And so he gave him a very special deity that he said, this deity is identical to me. That deity looks like Krishna. And that deity is called Gaur Govinda, because Mahaprabhu said, I am present absolutely in this deity. So this pacified Kasishvar Pandit. And of course, it was also exciting to go to Vrindavan. So he, in the end, he happily went to Vrindavan. Along took his Gaur Govinda, and he established Gaur Govinda on the right side of Govinda Devji, where he served them with great, great love. There's a verse in Sadhana Dipika. It says, I worship Sri Kasishvar Pandit, whose power of love and devotion brought Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to Western India as a deity. I'm assuming for the first time. So this is a historical event that in a deity form Mahaprabhu came there. I can't say for sure whether that was the first deity, but this this is mentioned. So it seems like Mahaprabhu coming to the western side with Kasishvar Pandit. And so he, apparently when he arrived, it seems that Rupa Goswami had already appointed Haridas Pujari as a chief priest. And so Kashishvar, he was not as much the main pujari to do the daily puja, but he set the standards for the puja. And he oversaw everything that was going on very, very nicely. And he worshipped also Rupa Goswami's, apparently he had a Shalagram Shila, and Sanatan Goswami's Govardhan Shila, and his own Gaur Govinda Dev. And so, and naturally, he became very, very dear to all of the devotees, especially to Rupa and Sanatan there. Very, very dear to everyone. And he was also responsible for establishing the cooking standards in the temple, very similar to how it's done in Puri, the dishes, the recipes, everything. And even today in Jaipur, the worship standards that were established by Kasishvar Pandit are still followed. They still do according to that. And that's where his beloved deities Gaur Govinda and Govindaji are now being lovingly adored by thousands of devotees in Jaipur, Rajasthan, every day. Amazing place. An amazing service that continued to go on. It didn't diminish, but it remained very, very wonderful. And apparently Kasishvar Pandit may have established that tradition of lighting I think it was like 50 kilos of ghee, making a ghee lamp on top of the Govinda Dev temple on every Ekadashi evening, apparently, which is something that was done in Puri, and I think to some extent that's still done there in Puri. But of course, we've all heard about how Aurangzeb saw that ghee, that light from that ghee lamp. So that tradition is prohibited now. That was, a terrible history. So that was stopped. So as far as in Vrindavan, there was Kashishvar Pandit stayed also in Sevakunj, and there was a place where he would fetch water for Gaur Govinda's service, and for this reason it's called Pandit Koop, the place where Kashishvar came for his water. And next to that well, there used to be a baitak, or a sitting place of Kashishvar. Unfortunately, that's no longer manifest, like so many things here in Vrindavan. And, so that was his life, surrounded by these extraordinary Goswamis and in Vrindavan, and service to Govindaji, which Govindaji just seemed, he was the heart and soul of the Vrindavan devotees. And then, of course, we know that Raghunath Bhatta also came. So many of the devotees were focused on Govindaji. Raghunath Bhatta served Govindaji also, and his disciple, one of his disciples, it said that originally Rupa Goswami would worship just in the grove, Govindaji, and he would worship them with, there's a word for it. It means like the natural elements, like just the flowers and the leaves and whatever you could find there. And but then a little later, Raghunath Bhatta's disciple, he made a smaller temple where Govindaji stayed for maybe 50 years or so. And that temple apparently, although I never saw it, was apparently there in Vrindavan until like 10 years ago. And then some crazy person tore it down to build a school, and that person is now in jail because that was a historic site. It was not meant to be torn down. And then later, the big, the temple that we know of, the awesome, gigantic temple of Govindaji was built. But then Kasishwara, he had a number of very exalted disciples, and one of his famous disciples, Sri Govinda Gosai, became the Pujari of Govindaji after Kasishwara. And Krishnadas Kaviraj mentions that there was no servant more dear to the Govinda deity than this Govinda Gosai. And then as far as Kasishvar Pandit's departure, I don't know any specifics, but we do know that his samadhi is there, and I believe it's his full body samadhi is very appropriately right next to Govindaji temple in the 64 samadhi area, right there next to Govindaji. And it is mentioned in Gaur Ganadesh Dipika that he was, there's two, he was Shashireka or Bringara in Braj Leela. So in any case, he is an eternal associate of the Supreme Lord. So what an extraordinary personality. So we'll finish there. It's a little bit maybe too long, but hopefully I will go on now and speak about Bhugarbha Goswami.